My name is Emily Carter. I'm 26, mother to Eli, a 4-year-old boy who's obsessed with dinosaurs and comic books. I used to study communications in college, but I had to drop out halfway through when I found out I was pregnant. Now, I work part-time as a librarian at a local public library. The pay is just enough, no one knows who I am, and I've come to find peace in that quiet anonymity. I received the invitation on a Saturday afternoon, right in the middle of organizing the children's book section at the city's community library. The ivory envelope was embossed with the unmistakable logo of Le Grand Hotel. No sender's name, but I knew exactly who it was from. Lauren Carter, my sister, 30. A successful attorney in Manhattan, soon to marry a Canadian cardiology resident. She's the child my parents are always proud to talk about. She's always known what she wanted. She never gave us a single worry. And me? I opened the invitation. The glittering italic letters danced in front of my eyes. The Carter family cordially invites Emily Carter and her son Eli to the engagement celebration of Lauren Carter and Dr. Nathan Cross. Time, 5 p.m. Friday. Location, rooftop ballroom, Le Grand Hotel, New York. I read it again. I hadn't misread it. My mother, Cynthia Carter, had sent it. There was no message attached, just one handwritten line in the corner. If you decide to come, I hope you'll dress appropriately. I let out a dry laugh. I wasn't surprised. That's just who my mother is. More invested in appearances than feelings, in the family image than any wounds we, her children, might carry beneath the surface. I remember the first time I felt like she had left me behind. I was 11. Lauren had just lost the state-level debate finals and cried the whole evening. My mother held her for a long time, whispering, "It's okay, sweetie, you'll always be the best in my eyes." That same night, I came home with second place in a regional art contest. I handed her the certificate. She barely glanced at it before placing it on the kitchen counter. "Good job, but you should focus more on useful subjects, like math or literature." It only got clearer as we grew older. I once wanted to major in graphic design, but Mom pushed me to choose communications. At least you can get a decent admin job if it doesn't work out. Lauren studied law, just as Mom had envisioned, and became the shining example of the right path. I was always the fallback plan, the child that needed adjustments to be acceptable. I sat down on an old wooden chair, running my fingers over the surface of the invitation. Should I go? I knew I wouldn't be truly welcomed. Lauren would look at me like I was a smudge on her perfect day. Mom would be polite, even kind, but in that way that makes you feel small without a single cruel word. There would be guests, dresses, champagne, and those sideways glances, as if they were watching a typo walk into a fairy tale. But Eli had overheard Grandma talking about the party. He had been excited for days, asking, "Mom, will Aunt Lauren wear a dress like a princess?" I've never said anything bad about Lauren in front of him. I don't want my son to carry my bitterness as his own. So I just smiled. "Maybe, and you'll get to wear your handsome little suit." I folded the invitation and slid it into the pocket of my coat. Maybe I would go. Not for Mom, not for Lauren, but for Eli. And maybe, just maybe, because I needed to prove to myself that I no longer bowed beneath those looks anymore. The day I stopped being the perfect daughter, I found out I was pregnant on a crisp autumn morning, just as the air turned cold and maple leaves began to scatter across the sidewalks near the dorms. I remember it so clearly. The second red line on the test appeared slowly, as if it knew I was holding my breath, still hoping it wouldn't show up at all. I sat there, silent on the edge of the toilet seat for 10 whole minutes. No tears, no panic, just shaking. My boyfriend at the time was named Cameron, a fellow communications major, charming, outgoing, once the president of the university radio club. We'd been together for almost a year. Not too dramatic, not overly romantic, but steady. Steady enough for me to believe. Steady enough for me to picture a small apartment, 2 coffee mugs, and a quiet kind of forever. I texted him at 8:24 a.m. "I need to talk to you, urgently." We met at the park near campus. I brought the paper bag with the test inside, my palms sweating through the thin fabric. Cameron showed up 10 minutes late, wearing a gray hoodie and holding a latte. He smiled, casual as ever, and said, "What's going on? You look serious." I handed him the bag. He fell silent. Then he said the sentence I would replay in my head 1,000 times. Not because I wanted to, but because it simply wouldn't leave. "Emily, I can't. I'm not ready for this." I went back to my parents' house that weekend. I thought, despite everything, they were still my family. My mother would hold me. Lauren would be shocked, but eventually she'd understand. I was wrong. That evening, I sat across from my mother in the living room. Everything was exactly the same. The polished wooden floor, the vase of lilies, the framed Disney family vacation photo on the wall. She held a teacup, eyes focused somewhere far beyond me. "I'm pregnant," I said. She didn't drop the cup. She didn't scream. She simply placed it gently on the table. Then asked, "Whose is it?" I said Cameron's name. She nodded, not surprised. Maybe she had already suspected. "What are you planning to do?" I bit my lip. "I'm keeping it. I'll raise the baby on my own." That was the first time I saw her eyes truly harden. She leaned back slowly in her chair, took a breath, and said the words that told me, with terrifying clarity, that I had just been erased from the list of acceptable daughters. "Then you take full responsibility for your choice. Don't drag the rest of us down with you." Lauren came home late that night. She was dressed in a cream blazer with the internship badge from her law firm still clipped to the collar. When I told her, she didn't flinch. She simply folded her arms and said, "You have the right to choose. Just don't expect me to cancel my interview to attend your PTA meetings. From now on, you live with your choices." I left the next morning. No suitcase, just 3 changes of clothes in a backpack and a blurry ultrasound tucked into the pocket of my hoodie. No one saw me off. No one said take care. Only my father, silent from the beginning, slipped a folded envelope into my coat pocket when no one was looking. It was $1,000 in cash. No note. No words. I don't blame him. But I don't remember him with warmth either. Eli was born 7 months later in a public hospital. No familiar faces in the waiting room. But when I heard his first cry, I knew. I didn't need anyone else to define me anymore. I was Eli's mother. And that, to me, was the proudest title I'd ever carry. The engagement party, a turning point. New York was colder than I expected in December. Eli sat quietly in the back seat, wearing a tiny navy blue suit that made him look like a miniature gentleman. He kept whispering the instructions I'd given him that morning. "Don't run, don't touch the cake, and don't ask if anyone's a real prince." I laughed. The taxi carried us to the Le Grand Hotel, the venue for Lauren's engagement party. Everything sparkled just a bit too much, like the entire room was trying to hide something beneath layers of glitter and crystal. A hostess escorted us to the rooftop ballroom. When the elevator doors opened, I momentarily forgot how to breathe. The room was bathed in golden light, blanketed with white flowers, and filled with the gentle hum of live jazz. Round tables dressed in satin, guests in designer formal wear, and the delicate chime of champagne glasses created waves of elegance and distance. My mother stood near the wine bar in a vintage teal gown. She spotted me and gave a slight nod, just enough to prevent others from wondering why her younger daughter looked so unremarkable. Lauren hadn't made her entrance yet. She was probably waiting for the perfect cue. I wasn't surprised. She always knew how to walk into a room like a leading lady under a spotlight. We were seated at table 12, near the emergency exit, far from the stage. I didn't complain. If anything, I felt relieved. Eli sat beside me, wide-eyed, scanning the room in awe. "Mom, Aunt Lauren really does look like a princess." I followed his gaze. Lauren had just stepped out from backstage. A form-fitting white dress, a sheer veil cascading down her back, and a microphone in her hand, as if it belonged there. The spotlight hit her perfectly. Her face, flawlessly made up, looked like it had been airbrushed onto the cover of a magazine, and she held the mic like she'd been waiting for this moment her entire life. Maybe she had. I remembered. Every Christmas before we opened presents, our mom would ask, "Were you good this year? What do you think you deserve?" Lauren would always answer confidently, "I was top of my math class." And me? I'd quietly hand over my drawings, hoping Mom would smile. She'd nod, then inevitably turn to Lauren. "Your sister is amazing. Smart and articulate. You should try to be more like her." In middle school, Lauren enrolled in debate club. I asked to join an inspirational art workshop. Mom said no, that's just a hobby. It's not something you can build a life on. Lauren was taken to Ivy League info sessions. I was told to stay home and study more math. I used to think I was being overly sensitive, until one day I overheard Mom telling her friends, "Emily's sweet, but Lauren's the one with real potential." In high school, Mom bought Lauren a new laptop for her group presentation. When I asked for a second-hand camera to learn photography, she shook her head. "You don't need that. You're not pursuing the arts." Lauren was never cruel to me, but she never stood up for me either. Maybe she was simply too used to being the chosen one, the praised one, the priority. And I too used to shrinking myself, just to stay out of the way. Now, watching her up on stage, mic in hand, the room silent at her every word, I wasn't sure if I was looking at a sister or a performer playing the role she'd mastered since childhood, the one who made others invisible by merely standing next to them. She smiled, and I recognized it. Not the kind of smile meant for photos or for family, but the one I'd seen 100 times, right before she did something you couldn't react to fast enough. "Before we move on to dancing and cocktails," she began, her voice clear and confident, "I'd like to share a special moment, because someone very dear has joined us tonight." She turned toward our table. I felt the blood in my body go cold. "At table 12, we have a guest of honor, my sister, Emily Carter, and her adorable son, Eli." A few scattered claps, some light laughter nearby. Heads turned, some smiled politely. Others didn't bother to hide their disinterest. Emily and Eli live a life quite different from what we're celebrating here tonight. She paused, just long enough for people to catch the undertone. Not as glamorous, perhaps, but certainly full of character. Eli looked up at me. "Mom, what's going on?" I squeezed his hand. The room held a kind of tension I knew too well, somewhere between civility and mockery. Lauren stepped down from the stage, lifting the mic like a seasoned host. "So I thought, why not auction off a brunch with Emily and Eli, raise funds for the children's shelter? A meaningful experience." Laughter rippled across the room. A woman in a red gown raised her wine glass. $100 if she shares her single mom survival stories. A man chimed in, $200, but brunch has to be at my place, with the pool, of course. The laughter spread like wildfire. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Eli shrank beside me, his eyes starting to glisten. I stood up. "We're leaving, Eli." I took his hand, turned away, and then a voice cut through the noise. Deep, firm, unmistakably deliberate. $100,000. The room went dead silent. All eyes turned to the entrance. There he was. A tall man in a black tuxedo, the light catching the edge of his glasses. Julian Westbrook. His name had appeared in Forbes' 30 Under 30, one of the youngest CEOs shaping the future of digital media. They called him a young shark in the industry. Founder of Westbrook Media at age 27, signer of multi-million-dollar deals with major studios and streaming platforms. But I remembered him differently. Julian had been the quiet freshman sitting in the back of our college lectures, always in a worn hoodie, eyes glued to his laptop. He didn't join lunch cliques or party invites, but he remembered details, the little things most people overlooked. I once saw him spend hours in the library adjusting subtitles for a group project. Once saw him help me gather fallen handouts when no one else bothered to bend down. I was stunned to recognize him, and even more stunned to realize he still remembered me. "I'll pay $100,000 for brunch with Emily and her son," Julian said, his voice unwavering. "Not because of someone's joke, but because I can't stand watching kindness being auctioned off as entertainment." No one laughed. Lauren stood frozen. My mother stiffened beside the bar. Julian walked forward, his eyes on me. "Are you okay?" And for the first time in years, someone truly meant it when they asked me that. I couldn't sleep that night. Eli had dozed off in the taxi, his head resting on my shoulder, still clutching the napkin from the party, as if he was trying to hold on to something kind in a room that had been anything but. I stayed up nearly the entire night, sitting by the window with a cold cup of tea in my hands. The $100,000 had been transferred to the children's charity that same night. But I didn't think Julian would actually follow through with the brunch. The next morning, as I was making breakfast for Eli, my phone rang. An unknown number flashed on the screen. I hesitated for a second, then picked up. "Emily, it's Julian. I hope I'm not calling too early." His voice was calm, clear, without a trace of hesitation. "I wasn't joking last night. I'd really like to see you again. And Eli." I paused. "Just brunch," he added. "No press, no auctions." I laughed for the first time in days. "Then, I guess I'll bring the pancakes." We met at a small cafe near Riverside Park. Nothing fancy, no white tablecloths, just wooden chairs and morning sunlight spilling through the windows. Julian was already seated at a corner table, wearing a light blue shirt with no tie, a far cry from the seven-figure CEO from the night before. Eli immediately noticed the toy car he brought. "I figured I should bring a peace offering," Julian said with a smile. I smiled back and sat down. There was a moment of awkwardness at first, but then it passed, like morning mist burning off in the sun. "I don't remember you much from college," I admitted. "I remember you," he said simply. I looked up. His gaze didn't waver. "There was a group presentation once. Everyone was panicking. You were the only one quietly organizing the whiteboard, handing out the notes. You didn't say much, but I remember that calmness. I still do." I blinked, surprised. "Then why, all these years? You never reached out." Julian looked down for a moment, a pause, soft and almost weightless. "Because back then, I was just a kid who wanted to succeed, be seen. I took shortcuts, left the decent parts of me behind. Last night, watching you stand up, take your son's hand and walk away without saying a word, I knew I couldn't stay silent anymore." Eli munched on his pancakes happily, glancing occasionally at Julian, then at me, as if trying to decode the silent language between the two adults at the table. Julian pulled out a slim folder from his bag. "This is a proposal, not charity, not pity. I think you have real instincts for storytelling, content building, and I have a position open." I looked at him carefully. "Are you helping me because you feel sorry for me?" Julian shook his head slowly. "I'm helping you because in a room full of successful people, you were the only one who didn't raise her voice and yet stood taller than all of them." When Eli ran outside to chase butterflies in the sunlight, Julian and I sat in silence. No words needed. "Emily," he said, his voice softer, "I used to wish I had the courage to ask you out for coffee back in college. Now, I don't want to ask anymore. I want to know if I can walk beside you every step of the way." I didn't answer, but I smiled, and for the first time in years, that smile was mine. Not a mask, not a shield, just mine. 6 months after that brunch, I stood on the 15th floor of the Westbrook Media Building, presenting the content strategy for a community campaign called Voices Unseen, a project dedicated to telling forgotten stories from overlooked communities. Sitting around the table were people who not long ago hadn't known my name. Now they listened, took notes, nodded with focus. Julian sat at the head of the table, silent during my entire 20-minute pitch, his eyes fixed on me, as if I were the only person that mattered in that sun-drenched room. That afternoon, when Eli and I returned to our new apartment, small but bright and peaceful, there was an envelope slipped under the door. No return address, but I recognized the handwriting. Lauren. Emily, Mom told me not to write. Said you wouldn't answer. But I had to try. Nathan called off the wedding, 1 week before the ceremony. He said, I don't know how to value people. That he was scared of spending his life with someone who looked down on everything she didn't understand. I read that paragraph twice. Lauren, the girl who had once been the flawless symbol of success, was finally facing exactly what she'd spent years dishing out. You may see this as karma. Maybe you're right. But I truly am sorry about that night. Not just for hurting you, but because I saw you as a shadow, not a sister. I folded the letter, unsure whether to cry or laugh. A week later, I was invited to speak on a national talk show about women who rebuild after ruin. I didn't wear a suit. I wore a simple white dress, the color I once avoided for fear of being compared to Lauren. The host asked me, "Is there anything you'd like to say to the people who once looked down on you?" I looked into the camera. I thanked them. She blinked, caught off guard. I smiled, because they taught me something invaluable, that respect doesn't have to be begged for. It's earned in the way you rise and keep living. At the end of the show, my phone buzzed. A message from Julian. Your mom and sister are downstairs. They're not here to reconcile, just to listen, if you're willing to speak. I glanced over at Eli, playing with his toys in the living room. His laughter rang out like light cracking open the room. I stepped toward the door, placed my hand on the handle, not to forgive, not to fix anything, but to show them. I'm still Emily. But this Emily no longer walks behind anyone. I met my mother and Lauren again on a quiet Sunday afternoon at a small tea shop tucked away in Brooklyn Heights. There were no reporters, no stage, just a wooden table, 3 chairs, and 2 women I once called family, and for a long time couldn't bring myself to anymore. My mother had aged. I saw it the moment she looked up at me. Not because of the silver in her hair or the lines near her eyes, but because her gaze no longer looked down on me. She spoke slowly. I'm not here to justify anything. I just want to say, I was afraid you'd fail and blame me for not stopping you, afraid to admit to the world that my daughter wasn't perfect. I didn't respond right away. I let the silence rest between us, like fabric settling softly across my chest, and then began to fold it back, one crease at a time. You may never understand how deeply I was hurt, but I've learned to keep living, even without your apology. Lauren lowered her head. I'm really sorry, Emily, not just for the wedding, but for all the years before that, when I knew I was loved more and stayed quiet. I looked at her. For the first time, I no longer felt like I was looking up. I don't need you to make up for anything. I just need to know you no longer see me as a shadow in your life. We didn't hug. We didn't cry. We just sat there, quiet. 3 women, finally sharing a table, without needing to decide who was right, who was better, or who was broken. And maybe that was the best kind of beginning I could hope for. 1 year later, Rose Hill Estate, upstate New York. The sun shone golden like honey that day. Eli wore a tiny suit with a silver hydrangea pinned to his chest. He walked ahead of me, holding a wooden sign that read, "Here comes Mommy." Soft music floated through the sunlit garden. I walked down a path lined with white flowers, wearing a simple wedding dress, beautiful in its quiet elegance. Not a princess gown, but the dress of a woman who had chosen herself. Julian stood at the end of the aisle, dressed in midnight blue. He didn't take his eyes off me for a single second. I once thought I'd never fall in love, he told me on the day we got engaged. Until you walked into that room, holding a little boy's hand, and my heart knew. That was family. My mother sat in the front row, holding Eli's hand. Lauren stood beside me, holding my bouquet. No one here was perfect. only people who had once been wrong and chose to walk a better path. Julian placed his hand over mine. I smiled. We may not have started like a fairy tale, but do you think this ending is Disney-worthy? I laughed softly. No. It's better than a fairy tale, because this time, I don't have to disappear at midnight. And just like that, I, Emily Carter, who once lived in the shadows of others, now stood at the center of my own light. Not waiting to be chosen, but choosing.